It's Mo. And it is March 3rd, and I just finished the first book that I read in March, but I can't tell you what it is. It's for a secret TBR, but I wanted to pop in and say that I read one book in March so far. It is March 14th. It is Daylight Savings. It is the day before the Ides of March. It is almost St. Patrick's Day. The next book that I finished in March was Dead Wake by Erik Larson. I have a whole vlog on this book and another Erik Larson book that I read in February, Thunderstruck, my BookTube Spin vlog. Spin 1 of BookTube Spin. It's a nonfiction book. It takes place at a pivotal point in the First World War. America has not joined the war yet, and England and Germany are at war and at a point where something needs to give and America needs to get involved. This is the story of the captain of the Lusitania, the captain of the U-20 boat that torpedoes the Lusitania. This is the story of the political string pulling that's going on behind the scenes, and also the story of the passengers on the Lusitania and what became of them after the disaster. So this was a really interesting read. I really enjoyed that it was different than what I normally read, even for nonfiction. It took a larger look at history than I'm used to reading. Highly recommend. Excellent book. You can see more of my thoughts in my BookTube Spin blog, so check that out. I will leave it linked below. This morning I finished the third book that I've read in March, which is Fletch by Gregory and MacDonald. This is a murder mystery set in the 1970s and written in the 1970s about an investigative reporter, Fletcher. Fletch is on the beach undercover, and a wealthy young man comes to him and tells him that he would like him to murder him. That's not a spoiler. It happens in the first page or so. Fletch is a sarcastic, funny investigative reporter, and he now finds a story not only on the drugs on the beach, but the story of this wealthy gentleman who wants to be murdered. Fletch starts investigating both of those things at the same time, and you see a little bit of Fletch's past, you see his relationship with his ex-wives, you see his relationship with his editors, you see his relationship with the people who he gets to know through these two investigations. This book was made into a movie in the 80s with Chevy Chase. It's very punchy and funny, silly, fast-paced. The book has a lot of problematic parts. I mean, it was written in 1975, and it is written about like a freewheeling, wild investigative reporter breaking the rules. There is a lot of harsh language, a lot of calling women bitches and using those kind of harsh words towards women, but there is also a lot of love. You can imagine the scrapes and problems that Fletch gets into and then has to get his way out of. I did have a little bit of issue in the beginning, kind of getting into that 1975 writer's headspace and getting over some of the more disturbing, problematic aspects, like constantly calling women the B word and underage consensual sex and other things of that nature. But in the end, I really did enjoy this book. It was written almost entirely in conversation, which I thought was really interesting. There's very little descriptive passages or omnipotent passages. It's almost entirely written in dialogue, which I thought was really interesting. It definitely added to the effect of it being like fast-paced, of it being like exciting, of the reader being pulled into the investigation, because you don't hear too many of Fletch's thoughts and feelings. You more get what he is finding out through the conversations that he has, and the clues are coming at you as they come at him. You feel really engaged in the mystery, and you are picking up things that are going to be significant later, just as he is. It feels like you're very involved in the story, and I really like mysteries like that. I like mysteries where I'm also trying to figure out the mystery and not everything's just being told to me. So doing it mostly in dialogue I thought was an interesting choice, but also a good choice. I also see why this was made into a movie. It lends itself really well, especially to an 80s comedy. It has murder, it has mayhem, it has disguises, it has lying, like in that like a mistaken identity, like I'm gonna let you think I'm someone else kind of way. I recently watched Fletch 1, maybe like 6 months ago with my husband. I had never seen it before. The part that really stuck with me was Chevy Chase. I couldn't remember what happened in the movie. So reading the book, I didn't feel like I knew everything that was going to happen. I could kind of picture Fletch as Chevy Chase, although he's described quite differently in the book. Gave it enough of a characterization that like I had a good voice for Fletch in my head, especially because it's all him talking. We just a few weeks ago watched Fletch 2, which is super problematic as a movie. I mean, Fletch 1 was problematic too, but Fletch 2 has like Ku Klux Klan and like a bunch of really weird, not okay stuff in it for now. So if you're going to watch Fletch 1, keep in mind there definitely are some problematic elements. If you're going to read Fletch 1, keep in mind that there are some problematic elements. If you like a fast-paced, punchy murder mystery, I would definitely suggest checking this one out. And I will check back in with you when I read some more in March. It is March 17th, it is St. Patrick's Day, and I have 2 more books. Marty's scratching at the door. Can you see it? You can see his reflection. The next book that I finished in March was Cover Her Face by P.D. James. This is the first in the Adam Dalgliesh series, which I have been working my way through. This one is interesting because I kind of thought this would be like a introduction to Adam Dalgliesh, and it would have more to do with him as a young detective, and you would kind of find out more about his history, but it really just jumps into a murder just the same way that almost all of her Adam Dalgliesh books do. It differs slightly from some of her other books because it's not as much of a isolated location. It does take place all in one manor house where a young servant has been murdered. So it is like a closed circle mystery in that like the only people really who could have committed the murder were in the house, although there are some like red herrings of people who maybe were in the house even though you don't know they were in the house. And it has a lot to do with secrecy, and it has a lot to do with like proper place, people's proper place, and you know, whodunit. I did really like this one. It didn't give me as much of the like introduction to Adam Dalgliesh that I was hoping for. Like I was kind of hoping it would open with him, and I was kind of hoping it would like be more about him and his becoming a detective. We've seen a little bit of that in The Mistletoe Murder, which has a story of him as an early detective. It took me like about 24 hours to read this book. It was really fun, really fast-paced, really interesting. I had an idea of who the murderer was, but there were a couple of ways it could have gone, and I think with all of her books, you usually kind of have like, it's down between 1 or 2 people. You can see the motives for each, and then she lets you know at the end who it is, and it might not be overly shocking or exciting, but it is a fun time. The next book I finished in March was Batman: The Long Halloween by Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale. I've read this many, many, many times. It is a large graphic novel, a bind up of 13 issues that Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale did. They had previously done some other Batman work together. They've worked on some Superman books. They're definitely like partners a lot of the time when it comes to writing comics. This is one of my favorite comics. I love the artwork. It's very 90s. I think it was originally written in like 1995, 1996, and it's very 90s. It has like the very long-eared Batman, very traditional, like super, super muscly superhero, super sexy, big-breasted, you know, woman. But I think that Tim Sale's interesting and noir style is really different than a lot of Batman books you might see. Has a little bit of that Frank Miller style, elements of like black and white, very like stark. Hope that Irving, get out of here. Get. For me, Tim Sale was one of the first artists that I saw that was doing like 90s comics, but also this personal style. I think like Darwin Cook went on to do things like that, and a bunch of other people, even Mike Mignola could be considered in there, you know, someone who had previously done very traditional work and now was like branching out and doing their own thing. And this book is always a great read. It is March 24th. I finished The Wife Upstairs, which I got at a free little library. This is a contemporary mystery thriller set in the Atlanta area, which I thought was interesting. It is about a young woman who is escaping her past and takes a job walking dogs in a rich neighborhood that she kind of aspires to live in. And she has quite a few things that she is kind of running from. When she walks around the neighborhood, she likes to look at all the houses, she likes to imagine herself living there, and one day as she's looking at her favorite house, the occupant of the house comes out and nearly runs her over. They start chatting and they start flirting, and the rest of the book is kind of about their relationship and his relationship to his dead wife. It was making the rounds on BookTube last year. It was published in 2020. I will say that I have read quite a few more contemporary books this year so far than I normally would. And I read a book earlier this month that reminded me a lot of this book in that it was a contemporary book. It was written in 2020. It was a mystery thriller. It was set in the modern day. And something that I hated about both the books is that the first line was like a curse word. It was like F this, F that. And there was all these curses kind of peppered in the very first page. And I just felt that that was I curse all the time. I'm not saying that I don't want curses in book. I read lots of books with curses in them. But to me, it was the writer trying to be edgy and trying to be modern and to be shocking right off the bat, and it just turned me off right away. The other thing that these two books, The Wife Upstairs and the other book I'm discussing, have in common is that they have dual narrators and they have sections for the narrators. I don't really understand the idea of dual narrators. I definitely don't like it when it's multiple POV, first person present. I hated Game of Thrones, the first book. I don't like to read that. And with 2 people or 3 people, I just feel why? Why? I don't think it was necessary in this book. I don't think it was necessary in the last book. I don't think it was particularly well done. This one, the 2 main narrators definitely had more distinctive voices, which I appreciated, but I don't know. It doesn't do it for me. I don't love it. Not to say I didn't enjoy this book. I did enjoy it. It was very fast. I read it in 2 days. It was easy to read. There was nothing difficult about this book. Nothing strenuous, nothing that you really had to think about, no themes that were hard or uncomfortable or, this was a very easy book. Perfect beach read, perfect thing to just blow through and then maybe you never really think about it again. And the ending mystery was kind of there were a couple things that it could have been, so I was kind of well, are they going to do a twist? Could it be this thing and it's a twist? No, it wasn't. It was the thing that you think it is, which is fine. I'll never read it again, and I probably won't read any Rachel Hawkins again. There was nothing that endeared me to her through this book, and there was nothing that endeared me to this book in such a great way. And then the next book that I read was The Lake District Murder by John Bood. This book is one of the British Library crime classics. This cover is beautiful. I love it. It is a little bit longer. It's almost 300 pages. Marty just moved the camera. Thanks, Marty. Stop it. Stop it. It's a Golden Age mystery, and it was written in 1935. It's about Inspector Meredith, who is a police inspector in the Lake District section of England, and he called out to a suicide at a local petrol garage, so a gas station. He sees a few things in the suicide that make him think that it's probably not a suicide. So he starts investigating, and he comes to the conclusion that this is actually a murder. He is finding clues, and you're finding clues, and it kind of leads back to the petrol distribution. So he kind of goes off on that tangent. I enjoyed this book. I enjoyed this mystery. Very Golden Age and very British. But it was boring. There's a lot about petrol stations and petrol trucks and petrol distribution, and him going home for lunch is a very common theme. So he goes home every day to lunch, which is kind of interesting to think about. I like the idea that back in the day you didn't go out to eat or pack a lunch or get something from a vending machine. You would just walk home and eat your lunch at home, which is a very cool practice, I think, and maybe something that should be brought back. Maybe everyone should work so close to their home that they're able to come home for lunch. That would be cool. It's very dry, very dryly written. Now, all that being said, I did really enjoy it, and I liked the slow pace of it. You kind of felt transported back to the 30s when this was like exciting. Oh, I could see myself in front of the fire, like turn off the wireless and read my cozy murder mystery. I liked Inspector Meredith. He's definitely like on the straight and narrow. He is inventive and imaginative as a detective, very much on the side of right, and he knows right from wrong. That being true, he's not above a little creative detective work, pretending that he's someone else or disguising himself as a motorist to check in on a petrol station. And I like that when he is faced with the idea of the potential outcome of the murderers, that he does feel for them that they may be caught and hung by the neck. It's toward the end of March, and I finished The Woman in Cabin 10, and I just don't think modern thrillers are for me. This had some of the same problems as the other two thrillers I read this month. All these books opened with like extreme like cursing and foul language, which I'm not opposed to cursing and foul language, but like I just don't see that all the cursing in these three books lent anything at all to the character development or to the plot. It felt like it was squished in there to be shocking, to be modern, to be relatable in some ways, but it didn't feel relatable to me. Unnecessary writing, didn't add anything. A curse here or there, sure, but it was like every other word in all these books was like cursing, like, you know, F-bomb, 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 and it's like, why? Even if people talk like that in their own heads, which I'm dubious to believe, it's just unnecessary writing. You're trying to make a word count, so you put the word fuck 3 times. Like, it was ridiculous. It really turned me off to all the stories almost immediately. I think it was supposed to have the opposite effect, in that I think it was supposed to draw you in and be like, oh, this is like modern, this is like me. To backtrack a little and talk about The Woman in Cabin 10, this is about a young woman whose home is burgled right before she's supposed to go on a big trip for work. She works for a travel magazine, and this is her opportunity to really set herself apart and let her bosses know that she is reliable and capable and going to make a great story and become a great reporter. She's been working at it for years and she hasn't really advanced. She sees this as like her chance to advance. So even though her house is burgled and she is extremely upset by it and unsettled by it, she goes on this trip anyway. Now, the first night that she's on this trip, she hears something mysterious. It sounds like someone has been murdered, and she goes on to investigate this murder while she's on this ship. I won't say any more than that about the plot of the book. It's a closed circle mystery. She has to discover whether she did hear a murder and if she can help solve that murder. One of the things that I didn't like about this book, and I didn't like about any of the other thrillers, contemporary thrillers that I read this month, was the unreliable narrator. So in all 3 of these books, they are women narrators, women lead characters, and they all have some troubling past. They have panic attacks, or they've had mental breakdowns, or they're kleptomaniacs, or they're OCD. All of these women, like, they're extremely normal issues that they had. Like, having panic attacks from when you're a teenager as a young woman is extremely normal. It felt very ableist. All these conditions that these women suffered and all these mental issues that these women had were so looked down upon in all these books and seemed to be such a bad representation of them, when there are extremely normal things that women suffer with and men suffer with and young people suffer with and old people suffer with. So to me, these books all expected you to be dubious of these people for these very normal things that they had going on in their lives. It didn't make sense to me that, like, oh yes, because a woman suffers from panic attacks, that means that I have to question her ability. And like, part of the book was other people in the book questioning her abilities because of this, but like, it also really felt like you were supposed to do that as the reader. And I found that really like disturbing and like upsetting, that just because this woman suffered panic attacks in The Woman in Cabin 10, I was supposed to discredit her, or suffering from alcoholism. She drinks too much. So her account of things is always brought into question because of her drinking. Now, I worked in bars for years. I know that people who suffer from alcoholism can lead extremely normal lives, and just because you drink a lot doesn't mean that you don't hear things like a normal person or you black out all the time. Like, there are many people who are working through their alcoholism and living perfectly normal lives and are dealing with it perfectly normally from the outside perspective. Yes, they suffer from a sickness of alcoholism, but like, that doesn't mean that they lie or cheat or don't know when they've heard something or when they haven't. I found it like very upsetting that yes, you were supposed to sympathize with her, that other people felt that way, but the book also tried to make you feel that way. Like, maybe she is crazy. Maybe she didn't hear what she thought she heard. I don't know. That really bothered me about this book. I really didn't like that. And all three of the books had aspects of that, some to more or lesser degree. I think The Woman in Cabin 10 was the most annoying about it. And then the last thing I'll say about The Woman in Cabin 10 is, whereas it did take me a little while to get into the writing, but once I did, I enjoyed the writing, except it was so long and boring, and she just did the same things over and over again and talked to the same people and made the same mistakes, and they made the same mistakes, and then she like fought with one person and then made up and then fought with them again and then made up and then fought with them again. Like, where is an editor? Who is editing these books? I felt that all this extra narration just bogged down the story and took you out of the suspense elements of it. It wasn't suspenseful because you just hammered over the same things over and over again. I read a lot of Golden Age mysteries. I read a lot of older 60s, 70s, 80s mysteries, and those are so much better. This book was published in 2016, and the other two books I read were 2020 releases, and they stunk. So, I don't know. I should probably just stop reading modern day mysteries. And that's my catch-up. It is April 1st. And I am here to finish talking about my March reads. I finished 2 more books in March since I last caught up with you. Let me try to organize them a little bit. This one I picked up at my local restore, The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead. This one has been going around BookTube for a while and has got a lot of critical acclaim. It was published in 2019. It kind of goes with my theme of reading red-covered books this year. I don't know why. I was a little nervous to pick it up because the subject matter is supposed to be extremely heavy, but I'm so glad that I read this book because it was amazing. This book is about a young black man living in northern Florida in the 1960s. He is going through all the political troubles and emotional troubles that a teenager of that time, a black teenager of that time, would be going through. He is dealing with segregation. The civil rights movement is just starting, and he's becoming very interested in that. He's also a straight A student, and he is getting ready to go on to college. He's very excited. There is a unfortunate incident that lands him in juvenile detention, and instead of sending him to jail or a juvenile detention center, they send him to the Nickel Academy, which is a correctional facility for boys in Florida. The Nickel Academy is supposedly a educational and reform school where young men can get on the straight and narrow. Now, the Nickel Academy is completely corrupt and violent and abusive towards its subjects, both white and black, and it follows the story of this young boy and the people that he meets there and how he continues his struggles towards civil rights throughout his stay in the Nickel Academy. This book was based on real events. It is a fictional book with a fictional story, but there were many reform schools just like the Nickel Academy all over the country at that time, and let's be frank, there probably are still schools like that to this present day. The school was segregated, so the white and the black students were separate, and they were both horribly abused, many of them beaten and sexually assaulted, and many of them murdered. And this book looks at, from a fictional standpoint, the experience that might have been had by these young men at that time. It was graphic in many ways, and obviously it deserves a lot of trigger warnings for sexual abuse, for violence, for physical violence, for emotional violence, for beatings, and for murder, and I think also for white supremacy and racism. What I was worried about reading this book was that the depictions of the violence were going to be so graphic that I wasn't going to be able to enjoy it on any level. And I think this book did kind of an amazing thing by not having that be the case. Although the depictions of violence and abuse are graphic and are heart-wrenching, the story shines through, and it is a really fascinating story and extremely well written. Although it is a devastating story, and although it is a horrible glimpse, fictional glimpse into the reality of the world at that time, and as I said earlier, the world now, the horrible things that still go on, it ultimately is a hopeful book. So even though the depictions of violence and abuse are really, like I said, heart-wrenching, are really devastating, it ultimately leaves you with a little bit of hope for the future, which is kind of nice. Now, I will say, at the end of this book, I cried like a baby, and I cried for this book, and I cried for the characters in it, and I cried for the world, and I cried for the state of the world then, and the state of the world now, and there was like a moment where I was like sobbing early in the morning, and I thought I was going to wake my husband up, and I was like, I have to stop crying, because if I think about all the injustices and all the racism and all the people who just in my lifetime have been unfairly treated, and just the people in the last 12 months that have been murdered, I won't ever stop crying. So be prepared for that. If you are a sensitive soul, aside from just graphic depictions of abuse, there's a lot that you're gonna probably unpack about yourself and about the world from this book. So be careful. But it's a great book. So read it if you can. And then the last book that I read in March was not this Agatha Christie book, but I'll just cover it and we'll just pretend it was this was it. Murder is Announced by Agatha Christie. This is not the copy that I read. I listened to it on audio. It was a free audio book that I found online. It was read by Rosemary Leach. It takes place in a small town where everyone reads the local paper. The first scene of the book is every main character in the book reading the local paper, seeing in the announcements that a murder is going to take place at one of the residents' homes. Everyone thinks that it's a joke, they think it's a murder game, they think it's a murder mystery party, they don't know who put it on, but they all decide to go to this person's house. Owner of this house, Letitia Blacklock, is just as surprised as everyone when she sees the announcement. Everyone gathers at her house at the appropriate day and time, and just when they think nothing's gonna happen, someone bursts in and attempts a murder. Somehow the murder goes wrong and the young man is killed himself. Somehow Miss Marple gets involved. She ends up helping the investigators solve the mystery. This one was interesting because many of the Miss Marple books, Miss Marple isn't even in it until like the last quarter of the book. But this one she appears quite early, and she does do quite a bit of detective work. In the book specifically, they call little old ladies who stick their nose in and who kind of cat about, they call them pussies. So she is a pussy, and she is helping the investigators, and she says, like, I'm a little old lady, no one's gonna think anything if I'm looking for gossip, no one is going to be concerned if I'm snooping around, because that's what little old pussies do. I also thought that this was an interesting one because although some of the other Miss Marple books I've read have multiple deaths in them. This one was quite a high murder count. It was really, really boring to start, actually. I feel like this has been a month of books where I've been bored. The early part of the book is just everyone explaining where they were when the initial break-in and death happens. And you don't really know why at first. Like, everybody's going over it and over it. So, like, there's 10 people there or whatever, and, like, each person is saying, like, this is where I was, this is what I saw, this is where I was, this is what I saw. And it seems really boring, but it's very definitely like a big setup for kind of the reveal at the end. So it is worth it. I don't think that this reader wasn't good, but I think coming off the heels of some more dynamic readers, this one felt a little flat. I did enjoy it, and I definitely will continue with the Miss Marple series. There is one other book. I said last month in my wrap-up that I wasn't sure if I was going to include picture books, but I did pick up this picture book, The Bunny Book by Richard Scarry, from a free little library. I did read it this month, and it is a very adorable book. I'm continuing to put these kind of in the ends of my wrap-ups. I did participate in March Mystery Madness, and I'm going to do a separate little quick wrap-up video on that, but I did read quite a few mysteries this month. I read one children's book. This historical fiction did have a mystery in it. I read one graphic novel, which also is a mystery, a nonfiction book. Not as diverse reading month as far as the genre, and that partly is because of March Mystery Madness, but I feel really good about the things that I did read. I'm happy that I read so many mysteries. I didn't read a lot of mysteries in February, and mystery thriller is my favorite genre. I was happy to read some contemporary mysteries that people have been talking about, and I got to expand my mind a little and see if I like those kind of contemporary mysteries. I read some Golden Age mysteries. I read some mysteries from the 60s and 70s. I read 3 contemporary mysteries. I didn't like them. And I read 1 non-fiction. I read 2 books by people of color, and I got to find probably a new favorite book of 2021. I think that this is probably in the lead for best book I've read this year. Let me know if you've read any of these books or if you have thoughts on them, and that's my March, so I hope you had a great reading month as well, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks so much. Bye.